Hello and welcome to Mint. Today we are here to discuss Pune's pilot project of segregating waste into dry and wet waste. So the Pune model works in a way where the waste pickers are involved, the Pune Municipal Corporation is involved, and also the consumers are involved. It helps in benefiting all these three stakeholders. And we have with us Kaveri Gill in the studio, who is a development economist and has also authored a book on plastic recycling called Of Poverty and Plastic. Welcome to the show, Kaveri.
Thanks, Neha. Good to be here.
So can you tell us, what the waste problem is in the country and how big is the magnitude and what are the implications of basically the solid waste problem in the country?
So, Neha, this is an odd economy. For the producer of waste is really the consumer of primary products. Mm-hmm. And as the middle classes and elites grow and they become wealthier, there's going to be more consumption. So to take you back to some figures, the National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector, headed by the late Arjun Sen Gupta in 2007, they found out that there was an increase in the middle and higher income group of between 5 percentage points between 93, 94 and 2004-5. And in terms of the consumption growth rate, there was a compound rate of growth per annum of 4 to 6% for each of these groups. So you can imagine this group and the consumption expenditure, the composition is different because it's non-food items, it's essentially durable goods, and all of that's coming into the waste stream and primarily in urban centers. So now in terms of the waste management problem, traditionally municipalities have dealt with this issue the world over, and they treat it as a simple collection, transport, disposal in landfills methodology. And in India, they've been cash-strapped, so they have not dealt with the entire populations of cities. And as you can imagine, the populations left out are mostly the ones who are actually providing this informal sector service. So that would be those living in slums, poorer, subordinate populations.
So this informal sector, which works in the waste sector, the waste pickers or the rag pickers as we call them, or the informal sector, how important do you think are they to this sector, and what important role do they play for this sector?
So quickly, Neha, the context on the demand side, as I said above, is the shortfall in municipal provision, right? And on the supply side, the context, you don't see waste pickers in London. You did during Victorian times. So it is poverty. It's relative poverty, and even in India today, there's 93% of the labor force in the so-called informal sector. So that's the context on the supply side of why these people are doing this work. The other issue in India, stratification, is that subordinate identity, be it Dalit, minority Muslim, Christian convert, Bangladeshi migrant, they are the people actually doing this work. And within the informal sector, there's a finely tuned segregated labor market. In that, depending on your degree of contact with various kinds of ritually polluting material, you will be graded. So if I'm dealing with wet waste, like the waste pickers, it's one thing. If like itinerant waste buyers who go door to door and buy waste, we are all familiar with them, feriwalas, they get dry waste, segregated waste, so it's higher value. But even on the social dimension, there's a difference. So that's our context, and we can't get away from it.
Yeah. Also, do you think, this Pune model, which is segregating dry and wet waste, do you think this is a good option? Do you think this is the way to move forward?
Well, actually, Neha, the informal sector has always been dealing, so in fact, the informal sector is only informal so far as, it's I suppose there's not an injection of big capital. But in terms of organization, it was a finely tuned system. Now, the Pune model, and I talk here about the KKPKP, this is a union that was formed in 93, and it has over 10,000 workers, both itinerant waste buyers and waste pickers. And in the mid-2000s, when they were confronted with the issue of privatization, and I will come back to that in the changes in this sphere, they decided that they would organize a subset of that into Swachh, which is the only collective based on this union past. And it's made up of, waste pickers. And so they are organized into this door-to-door collection. So essentially, when we are talking about the policy changes, what has happened is a big move towards privatization. Yeah. Privatization from door-to-door collection right up until the end point. Yeah. Now, what happened with that is that what it essentially means is that they were closing off access to this entire pool of informal sector workers who were already doing this job.
True.
So, what this unionized base collective in Pune is doing is that it is fighting for two things. One, access to this waste, be it at the household level or in the dhalao level, which is, second best because it's mixed waste, and we come back to that ritually polluting element. And the second thing is to fight for the rights of these workers, whether it's with the municipality or with the private companies. So the rights would mean everything from health insurance to some kind of security to minimum wages, because, essentially they have been earning more in the informal sector than what they are likely to earn in the private sector.
Right. Also, we've seen a lot of policy changes recently, on how we should deal with solid waste. With the problem emerging in Bangalore, Delhi, I think, is the next in line, which will not have any landfill soon enough. Yes. And a lot of other cities reporting, less space, less land for landfills. And that's a concern. But do you think the way the government is dealing with it, the policies they're introducing, are in the right direction?
Well, Neha, it's a bit perplexing. Because set aside the social equity argument of poverty and employment for these masses. Yeah. And it is masses because, as I say, there's jobless growth in the formal sector. Agriculture is decimated. So where are they to go, right? That is the question. But the secondary question on purely green merit is that the hierarchy that's well accepted globally is reduction, reuse, recycle, energy recovery, and last is disposal. Yeah. So now disposal, landfills, that option, as you're mentioning, is closed off. Why are we going to waste to energy recovery plants? Why are we going in the mechanized Western technological solution of the 70s that has been known to fail in our country, in our cities before? When we already have this large pool that is working on recycling, and, so one has to think about what is driving these kind of policy options. And again, let me stress that I speak here purely on a green merit. And I'll come back again to this question of poly bags banning, recycling. Yeah. We all know from the 7th plan onwards, one of the biggest sunrise industries in this country was petrochemicals. Yeah. And the growth rate of that sunrise industry, the phenomenon growth rate, is what is actually finally coming into the production, the waste stream.
True.
So, rather than focus on the poor subordinate groups that are recycling and making, what is at the end of the day a secondary, it's not the ideal livelihood for anybody, to kind of displace them and move in this direction of private companies coming in. And I say private companies coming in because the other fact is that when they come in, they are still relying on these informal sector networks to actually collect the door-to-door waste.
And provide it to them.
And provide it to them, because I come back to the social stratification underlying this segment. As I say, there were subaltern communities doing that, and they are still doing it. So the difference is only that they've been pulled into this private sector kind of a firm. And the idea that they get, better livelihood is a hogwash, because the trend in India, if you look at any of the large-scale surveys, is for informalization within the formal sector. So, the security, benefits, health, other kinds of input is not forthcoming. And what happens when they go into a firm like that is it's kind of closed off for researchers, to even outsiders like me.
True. Also, Mr. Chidambaram in his budget speech spoke about, subsidizing waste to energy plants. And that came as to a lot of people who work in this sector and to a lot of environmentalists, it came as a shock because, they didn't want waste to energy plants subsidized. Do you think that's had some bit of an impact on the policy, his announcement during the budget?
Absolutely, Neha, but I think the trend, as in many other sectors in the India of 2013, is towards privatization, whether it's warranted or not. And let me go back to this question of recycling. So Europe has about 7 7 to 8%. They would love to have more. The EU is trying, but because separation and processing costs are so high, and ultimately they are still mediated by human beings. So their labor costs are so high.
True.
You know, here we have this resource. India is recycling 60 to 80% as opposed to China's 10%. Here's where, you know, we are ahead of the curve, and you have these kind of disruptive policies coming in, being pushed, you know, and as you say, the mention of subsidy, and you really have to question the logic from an environmental perspective.
True.
I won't push the social justice argument because, you know, that's a big concern for me, but, you know, it may not be for, you know, this whole kind of movement that's begun on, you know, clean development mechanisms. And again, to give you an example, like on these waste to energy recovery plants, they are trying to claim carbon credits.
Yeah.
So that again, big capital can exchange these on the trans-global market.
Right.
So in the end, I have to say, Neha, that all around I see policy heavily weighted towards the interests of the middle classes and elites. And, you know, a city is a space we all have to share. And if we don't recognize that and embrace that, I think we are creating problems for ourselves.
Right. Just maybe the last question on, you know, do you think like Pune is doing it at the ward level? They're segregating waste, they're using it at the ward level, be it a biogas plant, be it whatever they're using it in. Do you think this is the way to go forward and not, you know, collecting it for the whole city and doing it ward by ward and using it there and, you know, getting rid of the waste
in the whole
ward? Or
I think Neha, Pune is an interesting example and a unique one, and that's why I wanted to showcase it as well. They have this unionization, strong solidarity, mass mobilized base. And the reason I say it comes in handy is because you know, whether it's the PMC, the municipal corporation engaging, or the private sector, they all want to utilize this informal network, which, you know, is frankly giving a lot of benefits in collection, in segregation, in actually doing the work, that I would say none of us, you know, again, elites, middle class, you know, households, we don't want to segregate our waste.
Yes.
We don't want to get involved in all of that. So there are these people doing this job. And what this union and this NGO has been able to leverage, because it's this kind of mass-based thing, it's got very deep roots, you know, and solidarity. And as I say, it's the only case where the itinerant-based buyers and waste pickers, all the informal collectors have been organized, and they've been given, you know, it's a bit like the Seva model or something, except that it's only for informal waste workers. So, you know, it's a remarkable example, but I would say to you that that is the way for cities to go, Neha, because I go back to the beginning, we are only going to get wealthier, or at least certain amongst us are, and our consumption is going to increase. It's going to be of a different order of the quality of waste as well as what that waste is made of.
True.
And we need to deal with that.
True. So as you put it, Kaveri, it'll have to be a joint effort between the consumers, the producers, the waste pickers, and the municipalities. No one can do it on their own. And privatization is definitely not the way forward, according to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this, Kaveri.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Keep watching Mint.